The glass did not shatter dramatically. It simply slipped from the edge of the mahogany sideboard and hit the marble floor of the Hargrove Estate's dining hall, with a sound that was too small for the silence that followed it. A thin, precise crack, like the first fracture in something that had been holding too long. Zara did not move to pick it up. She stood near the entrance of the dining room, with her hands clasped in front of her posture the way it always was at these gatherings. Careful, considered, occupying exactly as much space as was necessary and no more. The Hargrove annual summer estate dinner had been going on for 11 years. Zara had attended 9 of them. She had learned, by the third year, that the trick was not to arrive with expectations. The trick was to arrive the way you might approach a body of water whose depth you could not see from the surface. Carefully, 1 foot at a time, always ready to find solid ground beneath you, even when you were fairly certain there wasn't any. Her husband, Derek Hargrove, was laughing at something his brother said near the fireplace. He had the kind of laugh that filled a room the way furniture did. You stopped noticing it after a while, but you always felt slightly more crowded because of it. His brother Elliot was standing beside him with a glass of something amber, and when Elliot glanced across the room and saw Zara near the entrance, his expression did what it always did. It adjusted. Not dramatically, just enough. That was the thing about the Hargroves. They were very good at adjustments. The first time Zara had attended this dinner, she had worn the wrong thing. Not wrong by any standard that anyone could have articulated. Her dress had been appropriate, her jewelry understated, her hair in a style she'd spent the better part of a Saturday perfecting. But Derek's mother, Constance Hargrove, had looked at her when she walked in and had said, with a warmth that was technically indistinguishable from kindness, "Oh, you look so comfortable." She had not said it to anyone else. Zara had spent the drive home trying to determine what it meant, and had eventually concluded that the meaning wasn't the point. The delivery was the point. The slight pause before comfortable. The way Constance's eyes had moved from Zara's face to her dress and back again with an efficiency that was almost impressive. Zara had not told Derek about it. She had not told him about a lot of things. She had not told him about the summer, gathering 2 years in when his cousin Felicity had called her exotic 3 times in one evening, each time as though it were a compliment she was generously bestowing. She had not told him about the year the family photographer had arranged the group portrait on the front steps of the estate, and somehow, in the shuffling of positions, Zara had ended up just outside the frame, standing on the lawn in her evening gown, while the official Hargrove family photograph was taken without her. She had found out when the framed print appeared on the wall of Constance's sitting room 6 weeks later. She had stood in front of it for a long time. She had not told Derek about that either. What Zara had told Derek in the early years was that she loved him, which was true. It was also true that love, as she understood it, had never required her to pretend that she did not see the things she saw. But the Hargroves were skilled at a particular kind of invisibility, the kind where the harm was always just deniable enough, just ambiguous enough, that saying it out loud made you sound unreasonable. And Zara had spent enough of her life being dismissed as unreasonable that she had learned to weigh the cost carefully before she spent it. The cost, 9 years in, had gotten very high. The dinner was being held on a Thursday evening in late June. The estate sat on a property in the Muskoka region, north of Toronto, the kind of place that looked like someone had decided that money should also be scenic. 64 guests, the Hargrove extended family, a number of Derek's business associates, 3 sitting members of provincial parliament, a federal cabinet minister, a retired Superior Court judge named Ellsworth, and the deputy mayor of Toronto, who had arrived 40 minutes late and had been apologizing about it to everyone except Zara ever since. Zara stood near the entrance to the dining room and watched the room arrange itself and thought, not for the first time, about the particular quality of silence that occupied wealthy spaces. It was not the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of everything being managed very carefully so that nothing uncomfortable had to happen. The catering staff moved through it like water, finding its level. The floral arrangements sat in it like objects in a painting, and Zara stood in it like she had been standing in it for 9 years, present, composed, and fundamentally exterior to the whole arrangement. Derek found her eventually. He came from the direction of the bar with 2 glasses of wine, and when he handed her one, his fingers touched hers briefly, the way they did when he was making an effort. "You okay?" he said. "Fine," she said. This was the language they spoke at these events. It was very efficient. Derek was not a cruel man. This was something Zara had spent considerable time being clear with herself about. He was not the kind of man who set out to do harm. He was the kind of man who had grown up in a specific world, had absorbed that world with his breakfast and his bedtime stories, and his understanding of how dining room tables should be set, and who found it genuinely difficult to perceive the gap between that world and the one Zara had come from. The gap was the problem. Not his cruelty, but his inability, or his unwillingness, she was never entirely sure which, to look at the gap directly and call it what it was. His family had no such ambiguity. His family simply did not want her there. They had found more sophisticated ways to express it over the years, but the core of it had never changed. Constance Hargrove swept through the room the way she always did at these events, with the precision of someone conducting a performance she had rehearsed so many times it had become instinct. She greeted the cabinet minister. She embraced the judge's wife. She paused near the deputy mayor, and she said something that made him laugh. And then she reached Zara, and her expression did the thing it did. The adjustment, the recalibration, the smile that was 1 degree warmer than it needed to be, in order to prove it was there. "Zara," she said, "you've done something different with your hair." Zara had not done anything different with her hair. "It's the same," Zara said. Constance tilted her head. She said and moved on. Derek, who had been standing beside Zara when this happened, said nothing. He was looking toward the window. Later, he would probably not remember that the exchange had occurred, which was its own kind of answer to a question Zara had long since stopped asking out loud. The seating arrangement at the Hargrove dinner had been refined over the years into a system that was entirely plausible as coincidence. Zara had been placed, for the 3rd consecutive year, at the end of the main table, close enough to the family to be technically included, far enough from the center to be practically irrelevant to any conversation that mattered. Her immediate neighbors were a second cousin of Derek's named Warren, who talked about his ski chalet in Whistler with the dedication of a man who had found his life's calling, and an older woman introduced as someone from Gerald's office, who spent the first course asking Zara what she did. "I run a company," Zara said. "Oh, how nice," the woman said. "What kind?" "Technology, goodness." The woman seemed to file this away somewhere. Derek must be very supportive. Zara drank some of her wine. Across the table, Elliot Hargrove was telling a story. He was a good storyteller in the way that confident men at expensive tables often were. He understood rhythm. He understood the pause. He understood how to hold a room. The story was about a deal that had almost gone wrong, and then, through his particular genius, had not. The people around him were laughing at the right moments. Zara listened to it with part of her attention and let the other part travel somewhere quiet. She had grown up in Scarborough. Her mother had worked 2 jobs most of Zara's childhood, one at a grocery distribution warehouse on Morningside, one cleaning office buildings downtown on Tuesday and Thursday nights. Her father had left when she was 6, which was something she had processed very thoroughly by the time she was 30, and which no longer occupied much of her emotional real estate, though she appreciated the foundation it had laid for her understanding that people did not always stay simply because you needed them to. She had started her first company at 24 in a 1-bedroom apartment, using a laptop that took 12 minutes to boot up and a business plan she had written on the back of a stack of grocery receipts, because she had run out of printer paper and had not wanted to spend the money. The company had failed inside 18 months. The second one had lasted 2 years before it found its footing. The third one had not failed at all. She was not thinking about any of this because it was relevant to the dinner conversation. She was thinking about it because she sometimes did, at these events. She returned to the apartment in Scarborough, and the grocery receipts and the laptop with its 12-minute start time, the way you might return to a set of coordinates you'd memorized in case you ever got very lost. She had gotten lost a few times. The coordinates had always brought her back. The main course arrived. Zara ate it and said appropriate things at appropriate intervals and watched the room the way she had always watched rooms. She was not entirely welcome in. With the calm of someone who had made a private decision, a long time ago, never to let a room know it had gotten to her. It happened between the main course and dessert. There had been wine. There had been the particular dynamics of men at long tables who had known each other for decades, and had never been required to account for themselves to anyone who wasn't already in the room. Elliot had said something to Derek. Derek had said something back, quieter, in the register he used when he was managing something. Constance, at the head of the table, had said nothing, which was its own kind of permission. Zara had been speaking with Warren's wife, a woman named Diane who was, in Zara's assessment, significantly more intelligent than the conversation she was participating in when Derek's voice came from behind her. Zara. She turned. His face was doing something she hadn't seen in a while. The jaw was set in the particular way it's set when he had been talking to his family for too long and had started to see her through their eyes instead of his own. She had learned to recognize this. She had never learned what to do about it. I need to talk to you, he said. Now, we're at the table, she said quietly. I said now. He reached out and took her arm, not gently, not the way he touched her fingers at the bar, but with a grip that meant something different. And when she did not move fast enough for whatever he had already decided was going to happen, the motion escalated. His palm connected with the side of her face. The sound of it was very small in the large room, and then the room went utterly, completely quiet. 63 people sat at or near that table. A cabinet minister, a retired judge, the deputy mayor of Toronto, Derek's mother, Derek's brother, Derek's cousins and their wives and their colleagues and their friends, 3 members of provincial parliament, 63 people, and the silence that followed that small sound was the most complete silence Zara had ever heard inside a building. She did not put her hand to her face. She held very still for a moment, the way she had learned to hold still in situations that required her to decide who she was going to be before she did anything else. And then she stood up from the table, slowly, with the care of someone who understood that every movement she made in the next 60 seconds would be watched by 63 people who were all, in their various ways, waiting to see what she would do with what had just happened to her. She looked at Derek. He was already doing what people do in the moment after they have done something they can't take back. The face was changing, the hands were moving, the words were beginning to form that would attempt to reshape the shape of the thing. I didn't, he started. I know, she said. She picked up her clutch from the back of her chair. She straightened her jacket. She looked at the table, at the 63 people in their evening wear, the crystal glasses, and the white tablecloths, and the floral arrangements, and the cabinet minister with his water glass, halfway to his mouth, and the retired judge who was looking at his plate, and she said nothing. There was nothing to say. The room had already said everything that needed to be said about itself. She walked out. The sound of her heels on the marble floor was the only sound in the house. Diane found her on the terrace. Zara was standing near the stone railing, looking out at the lake. The June evening was warm and still, and the water was doing the thing it did at dusk, holding the last of the light a little longer than the sky. I'm sorry, Diane said from behind her. Zara did not turn around. Did anyone say anything, inside? A pause. The deputy mayor spoke to Derek's mother. Anyone else? Another pause. This one was longer, and it contained its answer. Right, Zara said. Diane came to stand beside her. She was quiet for a moment, which Zara appreciated. People felt compelled, in situations like this, to fill the air with something. Explanation, comfort, the elaborate architecture of how this could have happened. Diane seemed to understand that the air didn't need filling. You know, Diane said eventually. I've been coming to these dinners for 6 years, since Warren's cousin got married, and in 6 years, I've never once. She stopped, started again. I should have said something. Inside. Yes, Zara said. You should have. Diane absorbed this without flinching, which made Zara like her more than she had. They stood there together for a while, looking at the lake. Inside the house, Zara could hear, at a distance, the sounds of a dinner party attempting to reassemble itself. The clink of cutlery, a laugh quickly suppressed, the low murmur of 63 people deciding how to narrate what they had just witnessed to themselves and to each other over the coming days. She thought about calling someone. Her friend Kezia, maybe, who had told her 3 years ago, very gently, that she did not trust the Hargroves, and that trust, in Kezia's experience, was not something you got back once the people you'd extended it to had spent it. Or her business partner, Amara, who would pick up on the first ring and say exactly the right thing, which would probably be nothing for 30 seconds, and then a single question that would organize everything Zara was feeling into something she could work with. Or her lawyer, Priya, who had an after-hours number and who Zara had never called on it. She decided to wait. There would be time. She was 41 years old. She had built 3 companies. She had survived the first one failing, and the second one nearly failing, and the particular kind of loneliness that lives inside a relationship where you are never entirely sure whether the person beside you sees you or sees the idea of you. She had time. She went back inside eventually, not because she wanted to, but because she had left her phone on the table, and she was not going to send someone else to retrieve it. The room had shifted in the way rooms do after something has happened. The seating arrangements had loosened. A few people had drifted to the edges of the space, and a number of conversations were happening at low volume that had not been happening at low volume before. The dessert plates had been set out. The candles had been refreshed. The dining room was doing what wealthy spaces always did, absorbing the thing that had happened and covering it with the next thing that was supposed to happen, quickly, efficiently, without acknowledgement. Derek was not at the table. Constance was speaking with the judge's wife near the window. Elliot caught Zara's eye as she came back in, and his expression did something she had not seen from him before. Something that was almost, but not quite, uncomfortable. She held his gaze for 2 seconds and then looked away. She found her phone beside her dessert plate. She picked it up. There were 4 notifications, one from Kezia, one from Amara, one from Priya, who was apparently already awake or had never been asleep, and one from a number she didn't immediately recognize, which turned out to be a producer at a major national news network. Someone whose name she had been meaning to respond to for the past 2 weeks about an interview request. The message was brief. The segment was airing Thursday evening. Did she have a moment to confirm a detail? She looked at the message. She looked at the room. She put the phone in her clutch. At that moment, someone near the hallway said, "Oh, turn that up," in a voice that cut through the ambient sound of 63 people managing their discomfort. Zara turned with the rest of the room. The television in the sitting room, adjacent to the dining hall, had been on throughout the evening. Volume low, the kind of ambient presence that expensive households maintained to prove they were connected to the world without being distracted by it. Someone had turned it up. The national news was on, and there, on the screen, in the particular way that a face becomes undeniable when it is large and lit and surrounded by the graphic package of a major network segment, was Zara's face. Not a photograph, not a file image. A current interview taped 3 weeks ago in which she was sitting across from the anchor in a suit she had chosen because it was the color of deep water. The chyron beneath her image read, Zara Ozai Mensah, founder and CEO, Meriden Technologies. Below that, in smaller text, net worth estimated at $4 billion. The room did not make a sound. 63 people in evening wear in the Muskoka estate of one of Ontario's oldest family fortunes stood and sat and held their glasses and their dessert forks and looked at the television. And on the television, Zara Ozai Mensah, who had been sitting at the end of the Hargrove dining table for 9 years, who had been photographed out of the family portrait, who had been mistaken for catering staff at the spring luncheon of the third year, who had had her hair remarked upon and her dress called comfortable, and her presence adjusted around every June for nearly a decade. Zara was speaking to a national audience about the responsibility of founders to the communities they came from, and she was doing it with the ease of someone for whom cameras were not unfamiliar objects. Constance Hargrove had gone very still near the window. Elliot had set his glass down. The deputy mayor, to his credit, looked like a man who was doing rapid arithmetic. No one spoke. The television continued. The anchor said Zara's name again, and the chyron confirmed it, and the number confirmed it, and 63 people continued to not speak for long enough that the silence became its own category of statement. Derek appeared in the doorway from the hallway. He had his jacket in one hand. He looked at the television. He looked around the room. He looked at the place where Zara was standing, and his face did something complicated that she did not look at long enough to fully read. She didn't need to read it. She had read enough of it over 9 years to know the whole text. The retired judge, Ellsworth, was the one who called the police. Not immediately. First he spoke quietly to Derek's mother, and then he spoke to Derek, and then he used his phone, and then he stood near the entrance of the dining room in a way that suggested he intended to remain there until certain things had been clarified. The deputy mayor made 2 calls, neither of which appeared to be social. Diane had come back inside and was standing near the far wall, and when Zara walked past her, Diane said quietly, "I should have said something," for the second time. And this time Zara stopped. "You can say something now," Zara told her. "It's not too late for that." Diane looked at her for a moment. Then she nodded, and she went to find the judge. Kezia arrived 40 minutes later. She did not call first, she texted, "On my way. Don't leave yet." And Zara had not left, partly because Ellsworth had asked her not to until the officers arrived, and partly because she had decided, somewhere between the terrace and the sitting room and the television, that had said her name in front of 63 people who had spent 9 years deciding she did not need to be acknowledged, that she was done arranging herself around the edges of spaces that were not comfortable with her. She was done being the thing that adjusted. The officers arrived at 9:47. They were professional and efficient and entirely unimpressed by the estate or by the cabinet minister's attempt at a brief, collegial exchange. Derek was asked to step outside. Then he was not outside anymore. Constance Hargrove stood in the entrance hall of her estate and watched a police vehicle navigate her driveway, and her face held an expression that Zara had never seen on it before. Not the managed warmth, not the calibrated smile, not the adjustment, just the plain, unmanaged face of someone who had believed, for a very long time, that certain consequences belonged to other people's lives. Zara stood in the entrance hall and watched her watch it. She did not feel satisfaction exactly. Satisfaction was too simple a word for what she felt. What she felt was something older, the particular quality of standing on solid ground after a long time spent in water whose depth you couldn't see. She was tired. She was clear. She was exactly who she had always been, which was someone who had grown up in a one-bedroom in Scarborough with grocery receipts and a slow laptop and a knowledge, bone deep and early acquired, that the world did not make space for you by default. You made the space. You made it by being undeniable, by building things that lasted, by refusing, even when it was expensive, even when it cost you something real, to become invisible just because the room found your presence inconvenient. She had never been invisible. They had simply never looked. Kezia drove her back to the city. The highway was quiet at that hour, the dark farmland on either side sitting in its own stillness, and Kezia drove the way she always did, with both hands on the wheel and the radio on low and no need to fill the silence with anything that didn't need to be in it. "You okay?" Kezia said, somewhere around Barry. Zara looked out the window at the dark. "Yes," she said. "Are you actually okay, or are you saying it the way you say it at his family's dinners?" Zara was quiet for a moment. The highway moved under them. "I think I'm actually okay," she said. Kezia nodded. She turned the radio up slightly. Something with piano. something that didn't require anything from either of them. Zara watched the dark outside the window and thought about Scarborough, about grocery receipts, and a slow laptop, and the specific, irreplaceable knowledge that she had built what she had built without anyone in that estate ever knowing she was doing it, without their approval, without their welcome, without a seat at the center of the table, or a place in the family portrait, or any of the things she had stopped expecting and had eventually, quietly, stopped wanting. She had a seat at the table that mattered. She had had it for years. She rested her head against the window and let the highway carry her south, toward the city, toward the life she had built in the space the world had not offered her, but that she had made anyway, brick by brick, decision by decision, failure by failure, until it was solid enough to stand on, and it was hers.